My family excluded me from the will, not knowing I had another that nullified everything. I grew up believing that family love was unconditional. I spent my life trying to be seen, to be accepted, to be part of a name that always treated me as if I were a mistake. When my father died, I thought that finally there would be recognition, but I was erased even from the will, as if I had never existed. What seemed to be the end of my story ended up becoming the beginning of an unexpected journey. Amidst old pains, hidden discoveries, and battles that required more than courage, I found strengths I didn't even know I had. Today, my story is about reconstruction, dignity, and justice, even when all seemed lost. I'm very happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you are watching so I can see how far this truth is reaching. The sky seemed to weigh on my shoulders that day. The thin mist hid the sun, as if nature itself was mourning him. I walked among the graves with hesitant steps, holding back the tears that found no space in the silence of my chest. My brothers were ahead, flanking the coffin as if forming a wall that prevented me from approaching. No one looked at me. No one called me. The ceremony proceeded, cold and impersonal, as if my father was just another name carved in stone. I watched from afar, alone among familiar faces with no hand to hold. Even my mother seemed to have forgotten I existed. When I tried to approach the coffin for a last goodbye, Caleb cut my path with his gaze. And Julian turned his face, as if my pain was too inconvenient to witness. The priest recited words about legacy and family, but it sounded false to me. Legacy? What kind of legacy leaves someone invisible at their own farewell? My father was there, and even dead he managed to make me feel like an intruder. That exclusion hurt more than any offense said in life. It was the end, and I was just a spectator. When the last shovel of earth fell, I felt that a part of me had also been buried there. Caleb and Julian embraced, whispering among themselves. My mother was supported by the two as if they were her only children. I stood still, holding the flowers I never delivered. A cold wind cut across my face, but the pain came from within. I was a ghost in the midst of my own family. They didn't wait for the ceremony to end to begin. While guests were still whispering condolences, Caleb was already talking about legal procedures. Julian, with that calculated tone, recalled the financial responsibilities that would come. It was as if our father's death had merely been an item resolved on a list. Or worse, a key to unlock what really interested them. I sat on a side bench watching the two walk away with the family lawyer. Their muffled voices did not hide the urgency. They were discussing properties, accounts, investments, and not once did they mention my name. Not as a remembrance, not as a sister. The coldness in their eyes was the same I had seen so many times in childhood, when I asked for attention and received silence. Julian was on his phone, probably reviewing documents. Caleb, hands in his pockets, spoke like someone giving orders. Both had expressions of control, as if the world revolved around their commands. They were Hudson's, accomplished, respected men. And me? I was just the shadow of a surname that never embraced me. I felt out of place even in mourning. A distant cousin came to greet me, and seeing my brothers so busy, whispered, "They're already eyeing everything, huh?" I smiled awkwardly, swallowing the bitter taste of confirmation. Our father's body hadn't even grown cold, but for Caleb and Julian, the throne was empty, and the dispute had begun. They spoke as if I didn't even exist. As I discreetly moved away from the crowd, the truth began to form in my mind. There was no room for me in that closed circle. My mother's look, avoiding mine, said it all. I was a footnote in that family's history. There would be no remembrance, no mention, no place at the table, not even in memories. I felt the words I never heard take shape in the silence. You are not a part. And perhaps I never had been. It was as if my presence was a mistake everyone pretended not to see. In childhood, I strove to earn affection. In adolescence, I tried to prove my worth. Now, as an adult, only the realization remained. Nothing would change. My brothers decided they were the heirs, the representatives, the only ones who mattered. The meeting with the lawyer did not include my name, nor my invitation. I saw the exchanged glances, the closed smiles, and I understood. They already knew. Perhaps they always knew what I had not yet discovered, that the will did not mention me. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, watching the scene as if it belonged to someone else. But it was my life. My loss. My father. And yet, I was the stranger among them. What else could they be hiding? What else would be denied to me? But I couldn't imagine how much. The room was large, imposing, with high windows and heavy curtains. Seated around the long mahogany table, everyone seemed like actors ready for a carefully rehearsed play. My mother at the head, her eyes red and dry. Julian and Caleb on one side, exchanging impatient glances. I, in the opposite corner, trying not to disappear completely. The silence was broken only by the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Arthur Lincoln, the family lawyer, organized the papers with meticulous slowness. His face was paler than I remembered, and there was a subtle tremor in his fingers. When he cleared his throat and announced he would begin, everyone leaned slightly forward, except me, who barely knew where to look. It wasn't just fear. It was the certainty that some wound would be opened there. The first paragraph sounded like any legal formality, a speech of tribute, thanks, vague instructions. My eyes, however, raced through each line Arthur read, hoping to hear something that included me. A memory, a recognition, any mention that justified my presence there. But what I found was emptiness. A space where my name should be and wasn't. I remained there, motionless, listening to the assets being divided, the properties distributed, my father's final wishes being revealed. Each word was like a sentence. I tried not to show anything, but inside ice spread through my veins. I expected a gesture, a loophole, a last-minute mention. But there was nothing. My eyes searched for my name in vain. Arthur hesitated for a moment, his eyes moving from Caleb to Julian, before staring at the next page. Regarding my daughter, Leah Hudson. The silence deepened. My heart pounded. That was my sentence, my chance to exist in that will. But the following words came like an invisible blade, cutting deep. She shall not receive any assets or values specified in this document. I couldn't breathe. I felt as if I had been ripped from that room, thrown out of the family in front of everyone. Arthur didn't look at me, as if the coldness of the words could be softened by the lack of eye contact. Julian adjusted his tie. Caleb didn't even blink. My mother lowered her eyes as if she already knew, or preferred to pretend she didn't hear. I tried to find some justification in the eyes of those present, but I saw only indifference. No surprise, no empathy. As if that sentence had been expected, as if it had been carved in stone even before it was read. A part of me wanted to protest, to ask, to scream. But all I could do was clench my fists in my lap in silence. I still hoped it was a mistake. Arthur continued, now faster, as if he wanted to finish it quickly. The reading ran its course, and the document seemed like a list of confirmations of what I already feared. When he closed the folder and announced the end, I felt that something inside me had also ended. My throat dried. I wasn't there. It was official. Confirmed, sealed, signed, and read aloud. My father had erased me from his final story. The document that bore our family's name did not recognize me as part of it. It was as if I had been a temporary guest in his life, discarded before the epilogue. Caleb raised his eyebrows with a slight smile. Julian crossed his arms, satisfied. The silence after the reading was more deafening than any discussion. No one turned to me. No word of comfort, no question. The absence of reaction said more than any speech. I left the room with burning eyes and short steps, trying to maintain the dignity I still had left. Every meter to the door felt like a corridor of judgment. Outside, the wind blew with the same coldness I felt inside the room. The exclusion was not just legal. It was emotional, existential. That reading sealed a destiny that had been drawn for years, in every silence, in every contempt. But now it had an official stamp. I was, in everyone's eyes, someone who didn't even deserve remembrance. And yet, something within me refused to accept that as the end. Perhaps it was denial. Or perhaps it was the beginning of something new, still undefined. But, for now, all that remained was the emptiness of exclusion. And for them it was as if I had never existed. I spent the following days in a state of numbness. Every corner of the house reminded me of what I had lost, and what I never had, until Hope appeared at my door, bringing a shopping bag and a look that demanded no explanations. "You need to eat," she said, simple and direct, as only Hope knew how to be. I sat with her at the table, the silence between us more comforting than any hug. I didn't need to tell her everything. She already knew. The news of the will reading had spread, but unlike others, hope didn't come with pity. She came with indignation. They couldn't do that to you. Not without a fight. Her sentence echoed within me like a call. Until that moment I accepted my place as the excluded one. But she ignited something I had buried along with my father, the desire to understand why. "Are you just going to let it be?" she asked. "Are you sure that's what he really wanted?" For the first time, a possibility insinuated itself amidst the painful certainties. What if there was more behind that exclusion? Hope believed in me, and, more importantly, believed there was still something to discover. Perhaps there was more to this story. The next day, Faith showed up by surprise at my work. The cousin who had always been closer to Caleb and Julian now sought me out with restless eyes. We went to a discreet cafe, where she kept her voice low, looking around before speaking. "Leah, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I overheard Arthur talking to your mother weeks ago. And it wasn't about that will he read." My heart raced. Faith hesitated, biting her lips before continuing. "He mentioned a second document, something that seemed more recent. But then they pretended they never talked about it." The words fell like a bomb. I wanted to question her, ask for details, but everything seemed too vague to grasp. Still, it was the first crack in the official narrative, and it came from someone who had always been on the other side. Faith had no proof, just fragmented memories. But her expression said she wasn't lying. "I think your father didn't want to leave you out, Leah. Something is wrong with this story." I listened in silence, trying to contain the whirlwind forming inside me. Could it be real? Could there really be a second will, hidden from everyone, even from me? The fear of clinging to an illusion was great. But even greater was the pain of accepting that end without fighting. Faith held my hand firmly, and for the first time I saw an ally in her. If there was a spark of truth in that confidence, I needed to find it. Hope rekindled like a fragile flame. I returned home with my mind buzzing. I spent hours reviewing memories, analyzing old conversations, trying to find some clue that could support what Faith had said. Every drawer, every old notebook, every memory seemed to hide a possible answer. And the more I thought, the more convinced I became that my father, with all his flaws, would not have completely erased me. Not like that. Hope returned that night and found me surrounded by papers and notes. "This is the beginning," she said. "But you'll need to go deeper." Her words, though harsh, encouraged me. There was something there. Something that didn't make sense. And if there was a chance, however small, I had to grab it tightly. It was no longer just about inheritance, it was about my identity. I decided to look for Arthur. He seemed nervous at the funeral, and Faith had heard something that confirmed her doubts. He was the first name on my list, the first door I would need to open. But I knew he wouldn't give in easily. If something was hidden, it was probably part of a larger pact. Still, I had to try. I had to know the truth no matter the cost. Night fell, but my determination only grew. It was no longer about acceptance or resignation. It was about justice. About not letting my story be told by others. My father was gone, but perhaps his last word was still hidden somewhere. And I finally was willing to look for it. I couldn't give up now. I waited outside the law firm for almost an hour. Arthur wasn't returning my messages, and answering calls seemed out of the question. When I finally saw him cross the lobby, I immediately stood up. He stopped when he noticed me, visibly surprised or uncomfortable. "Leah, now isn't a good time," he murmured, trying to move on. But I blocked his path with my body and steady eyes. "You need to listen to me," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "Faith told me. And you know exactly what I'm talking about." He hesitated, as if each of my words forced him to face something he was trying to avoid. The hallway fell silent. Only the sound of the elevator ascending filled the space. "You owed it to my father, and now you owe it to me too." Arthur asked me to come into his office. The wooden walls and yellow lighting created a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. He sat behind his desk, took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Leah, certain decisions were made based on many things. Emotions. Moments. Your father had conflicts." But I interrupted him. "That doesn't explain erasing me completely." He didn't respond immediately. He just stared at me with an old weariness, as if this moment had been approaching for a long time. I'm not here to discuss memories, I insisted. I'm here to know the truth. He looked at the papers before him without touching them, and at that instant something in his gaze changed. His silence said more than words. Arthur got up and walked to the window. The sun was beginning to set behind the buildings, casting golden hues that hardly matched the weight of that room. Your father made me promise to keep it a secret if anything happened before he decided to make everything public. I remained motionless, my hands cold on my knees. He continued. He had doubts, fears. He thought you might not want to deal with what would come with it. With what? I asked almost in a whisper. Arthur turned slowly, and for the first time since I entered, I saw fragility in his face. With the conflict. With your brother's hatred. He wanted to protect you, but he also hesitated to fully acknowledge you. I heard that as if each sentence was a nail in the unstable ground I was treading. So there was something, but there was also guilt. Fear. Arthur seemed divided between duty and loyalty, not just to my father but to his own conscience. He didn't expect to die so soon, he continued. And because of that, everything was in limbo. I didn't have time to make him reconsider his official decisions. A tremor went through my body. Something much bigger than I imagined was hidden beneath that layer of silence, and now it was beginning to emerge. He sat down again, exhausted. I should have done differently, Leah. But I thought you would never look for me. There was something sincere in that regret, but I wasn't there for apologies. I was there for answers. And he knew it. The secret was there between us, about to be revealed. He carried a weight he didn't want to let go of. With trembling hands, Arthur opened a small locked drawer and took out a brown envelope. He placed it on the table as if it were made of glass. This should never have been hidden. But I failed. I picked up the envelope cautiously, my heart racing. This is the most recent will, he said. Signed weeks before your father's death. It was never officially registered, but it's legitimate. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The first line said my name, my full name, with all the letters that didn't appear in the previous document. My eyes filled, not just because of the content but because of the gesture. That was confirmation that I was never forgotten. Never scorned in the way everyone made it seem. My father had changed his mind, and no one knew. He left almost everything to you, Leah, Arthur completed. The company, the house, the shares. The words echoed within me, struggling to settle as reality. I was, on that piece of paper, the main heir. Not just financially but symbolically. The daughter he chose to recognize, even if belatedly. That changed everything. My exclusion was not the end. It was the mistake of a poorly told story. Arthur looked at me with regret. But I was no longer focused on him. My world spun, fast and unstable, between indignation, relief, and disbelief. They had hidden this. They knew or suspected. And yet, they tried to erase my existence. But now there was a chance to rewrite everything. Suddenly, I wasn't the excluded one. I was the centerpiece. I returned home with the secret will in hand, but I knew it alone wasn't enough. Arthur had been clear. The document was legitimate, but without official registration, it would be easily contested. I needed complementary evidence, agendas, emails, records of conversations, anything that confirmed my father's intention. I spent the following days immersed in old files, forgotten papers, and boxes of documents. I rummaged through closets, digital archives, drawers in the house where he used to work. Each folder was open with anxiety and closed with frustration. Some familiar handwritten notes moved me, but nothing there had legal value. With each frustrated attempt, the weight of urgency increased. Caleb and Julian couldn't discover I knew, not yet. The element of surprise was my only advantage. The pressure was constant. I slept poorly, my head full of hypotheses, and woke up with lists of possibilities. Hope helped me as much as she could, but even she began to doubt that I would find anything useful. Sometimes the truth is where you least expect it, she said. And perhaps she was right, because in a pile of irrelevant documents I found something strange, a file with an altered date. My heart pounded faster. This looked like an email copy between Julian and Arthur, with suspiciously edited passages. Words cut, dates swapped. Something had been manipulated. The true will was more threatened than I thought. Every paper seemed to hide something. Hope and I decided to cross-reference the file information with backup data. We connected old external drives, sifted through digital trash bins. That's how we discovered Julian had tried to delete records of conversations with Arthur shortly after our father's death. And not only that, he tried to rewrite part of the history, implying that the current will was the only valid one. We were in shock. He had gone beyond omission. He was actively manipulating information to ensure I never discovered the truth. I managed to recover part of the deleted files, fragments of emails, excerpts from online meetings. Small pieces that, together, told a different story from the official one. Julian was afraid of me, or rather, of what I could represent if I knew the truth. I showed everything to Arthur, who was visibly shaken. He pressured me. He said your mother didn't want conflict. But now the conflict was established, and it was no longer possible to ignore. Faith was also shocked, promising full support. The secret was broken. Julian was not just a cold brother. He was a conspirator. The image I had of him, of the silent, rational man, crumbled. Now I saw the manipulator behind the mask, the strategist willing to distort the truth to protect his power. This wasn't just about money, it was about control. And he was willing to destroy anyone who threatened it. My brother didn't just want to exclude me, he wanted to erase me. I found Julian days later, in the family company's office. I walked in without warning. He looked at me as if he already knew why I was there. "You found out," he said, not even trying to disguise it. "And what do you intend to do about it?" I didn't answer immediately. I just threw the papers on the table. He didn't read them. He just crossed his arms, impassive. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why lie? Why erase everything?" Julian took a deep breath and replied with the calm of someone who had already expected that question. "Because you never belonged in this place, Leah. And deep down you know it." His coldness affected me more than any offense. There was no regret, not even anger. Only contained contempt. "You knew Dad had changed his mind," I continued. "And yet you still tried to erase me." He didn't deny it. He just looked away towards the window. He had doubts, yes. And doubts don't count in the real world. The phrase chilled me. Julian had always been calculating, but now he showed the cruelty behind the logic. I left there with trembling legs but a firm heart. Now I knew who I was dealing with. This was not a dispute between siblings. It was a war of truths, and Julian was willing to destroy mine. I needed to be faster, smarter, more determined. And I realized that the worst was yet to come. I met Wyatt Carter at a business networking event. He approached with a firm handshake, a discreet smile, and eyes that seemed to see more than they showed. He said he admired the Hudson family's history and regretted what I was going through. His words were balanced, without pity, just respect. It was rare to find someone who didn't treat me as the excluded daughter. We talked for hours that night. Wyatt seemed genuinely interested not just in the family drama, but in me, in my ideas, in what I intended to do if I recovered what was mine. "You're facing a powerful structure, Leah," he said. "But no one wins a war alone." He offered help. Contact with lawyers, access to documents, even financial support if necessary. I refused at first, but he insisted without pressure. Hope was suspicious from the start, but I chose to ignore it. I needed allies, and Wyatt seemed like someone who played fair. We scheduled meetings, exchanged emails, and over time his presence became almost constant. He said he saw potential in me, that my struggle was inspiring. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like someone believed in my strength. Not out of convenience but out of conviction. I started including him in some strategies. He read my reports, listened patiently, and suggested more direct paths. He was astute but not intrusive. When I mentioned the secret will, he wasn't surprised, he just asked specific technical questions. It was as if he was already anticipating every move. For a moment I thought I had an ally. Over time trust deepened. Wyatt began introducing me to influential people, connecting me to networks that had previously seemed unattainable. Thanks to him, I managed to validate the authenticity of the will through a neutral expert. Every advance seemed more solid with him nearby. I felt that finally there was someone by my side who had no ties to my past, and perhaps because of that, held no similar prejudices. We walked side by side, discussing possibilities, predicting Caleb and Julian's next steps. Wyatt said I was more strategic than I thought, that my intelligence needed to be recognized. His words gave me strength when fatigue overwhelmed me. Even Hope, though still cautious, admitted that he had been useful up to that point. There were moments when he seemed more than a tactical partner. A longer exchange of glances, an unnecessary kindness. But I didn't want to mix feelings. Still, it was good to be seen. To be heard. To feel that, at least for someone I mattered. Wyatt knew how to build that bridge, and I crossed it without realizing. Perhaps he was different from the others. Everything collapsed one gray afternoon when I walked unannounced into the office Wyatt had reserved for our operations. On the table were documents I had never authorized to share. Analyzed contracts, asset estimates, projections, and next to them a dossier with my name highlighted, drafted by him. I quickly read excerpts. It was a detailed report on my potential for influence and manipulation. He walked in minutes later, surprised but not shaken. "Leah, I was going to tell you. This was just a protective measure in case things got out of control." I stared at him, incredulous. "You were using me?" He hesitated. And the silence was the most painful answer. There was no loyalty, only calculation. Wyatt explained that investors were interested in the outcome of the dispute, and that he acted as a facilitator. I was a pawn, an asset, and his sympathy, his support, his constant presence. It was all part of a play. The pain didn't come as a blow, but as a slow implosion. I should have listened to Hope. I should have listened to my instinct. Without another word, I left. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just closed myself off again in the armor I knew so well. Wyatt had been another proof that even the most promising alliances could just be traps. And once again I was back to square one, with the truth in my hands but no one around. Once again I was alone. After the disappointment with Wyatt, I returned to square one. Alone. Isolated. Trust once again seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. It was at this moment that Kyle Anderson appeared. A discreet intern from Arthur's office. I knew him by sight, always quiet in the corners, carrying folders and serving coffee. But that day he approached me with a different look. Determined and restless. "I heard you arguing with Arthur last week," he said in a quick whisper. "I don't want to get involved, but I think you're right." First I hesitated. He was young, inexperienced, and might just be curious. But there was truth in his voice. A real discomfort. As if he saw something wrong and could no longer pretend everything was okay. "If you want help, I can look for you," he offered. I was afraid of putting him at risk, but I accepted. There wasn't much to lose. Kyle began reviewing digitally archived files, cross-referencing old records and physical duplicates. He spent hours beyond closing time, silently, discreetly, without raising suspicion. And what he found gave me clues, dates, marginal notes, indirect references to the second will. Kyle was methodical, patient, and above all, honest. He never promised too much, but he never gave up. And little by little, he began to tell me about inconsistencies in the filing system, about mysteriously missing documents. "This isn't just a mistake. Someone wanted to hide it," he said. And he seemed to finally see what everyone else refused to see. He seemed to see the injustice that everyone ignored. One rainy night, Kyle called me, his voice trembling with euphoria. "Leah, I think I found it." I rushed to Arthur's office, where he was already waiting for me with a small box in his hands. Inside, among common envelopes and old reports, was a thin folder, marked with my father's initials and a date close to his death. "No one has touched these files for months," he said. It was buried under what seemed irrelevant. I opened the folder with trembling hands. There it was. An original copy of the secret will, with signature, stamp, and dates that confirmed its legitimacy. Different from the one Arthur gave me, this one was complete, validated, ready to be filed. Emotion coursed through me like lightning. It was no longer word against word. Now there was concrete proof. Kyle watched in silence, respecting my moment. But his eyes said it all. He knew he had crossed an important line, and that he was now part of something much bigger. "You're going to make it, Leah," he said with a conviction I couldn't even express. That young man, whom no one took seriously, had just changed the course of my story. I finally had the key. I held the document like someone holding a new destiny. For the first time, it wasn't just hope. It was certainty. I had in my hands what could dismantle the entire farce built by Caleb, Julian, and perhaps even my mother. It was enough proof to open a lawsuit, demand recognition, and finally take the place that was rightfully mine. But along with the relief came fear. Revealing that document meant igniting the war. There would be no more secrets, no more masks, no more refuges. Everything would come to light. The fragile alliances, the hidden interests, the lies. My entire family would turn against me, and this time there would be no turning back. Kyle looked at me as if he knew exactly the weight I was carrying, and yet he nodded. Hope cried when she saw the document. Faith, upon learning, promised to be by my side until the end. But there was a question that hung over me like a shadow. Was I ready for this? The moment of truth had arrived, and although every cell in my body trembled, I knew I could no longer hesitate. For the first time I could win. But to do that, I would have to enter the center of the conflict and face them with everything. Alone or not, fragile or not, I could no longer retreat. Because now the truth was there before me, alive and undeniable. But revealing it meant facing everyone at once. The courtroom was cold, with light walls and hard benches that seemed designed for discomfort. My family arrived en masse. Caleb with his chin held high, Julian with a calculating gaze, my mother in impeccable mourning. I entered last with Kyle, Hope and Faith by my side, few but firm. Each step I took echoed as an affront. None of them greeted me. We sat on opposite sides of the room, like two irreconcilable worlds. Arthur was pale, almost sweating, and avoided looking at me. The judge entered serious and everything fell silent. My heart was pounding so loudly it seemed to reverberate in my ears. I was there to defend not just a piece of paper but the right to exist in that family. As the lawyers presented their arguments, I watched them with keen eyes. I saw Caleb clench his fists, Julian whisper to his legal team, and my mother look at the floor. No one expected me to go this far. No one believed I had proof. But there I was, firm with the true will in my hands, and a story ready to be rewritten. When they finally called me to speak, I stood up with trembling legs but a firm voice. I narrated everything. The exclusion, the discovery, the betrayal. And in the end I handed the folder to the judge. Everyone looked at me as if I were an intruder. The judge examined the documents in absolute silence. For minutes the room seemed stuck in another time. Beside him an assistant checked seals, dates, signatures. Then he cleared his throat, looked up, and spoke with the serenity of one who carries the weight of the law. After detailed analysis, this court recognizes Gregory Hudson's second will as legitimate. The air seemed to vanish from the room. The judge continued. The previous document is considered invalid for being outdated and contradicting the deceased's most recent wishes. A gavel strike sealed the sentence. I didn't know whether to cry or breathe. I just stood there, still, absorbing the impossible. Everything they took from me was now returned. The opposing lawyers exchanged panicked glances. Caleb recoiled in his chair. Julian lowered his eyes. Hope squeezed my hand tightly, and Kyle smiled as if he had won too. Faith, moved, whispered, "You did it." But for me, everything was silent. Because that wasn't just a legal victory, it was the recovery of my identity. The cameras captured everything. Journalists began to record the case. And for the first time, the voice that had always been stifled echoed loudly, recorded, validated. I was the heir. I was the recognized daughter. The woman who dared to face an entire structure and won. The sentence fell like thunder. I was the legitimate heir. Caleb couldn't contain himself. He stood up abruptly, shouting that it was a fraud, that I had manipulated everyone. The judge warned him firmly. Julian tried to restrain him, but he was visibly shaken. The facade of control had crumbled. They were not prepared to lose, especially to me. My mother, sitting beside them, remained silent, motionless, like a statue. I looked at her, searching for any sign of remorse. But her eyes did not meet mine. She was there yet distant, as if she still resisted the idea that I deserved it. As if accepting the sentence meant accepting that she had failed me for an entire lifetime. And deep down, perhaps that was precisely what hurt her the most. The judge adjourned the session. People began to leave, but I remained there, looking at the faces that had so often ignored me. Now they had to see me, not as the shadow of the Hudson family, but as a legitimate part of it. Not because I begged, but because I fought. Because I proved it. Because I deserved it. I left the courthouse uplifted with firm steps, even though my heart was in pieces. The legal battle was over. But there were open wounds, broken alliances, truths about to generate new consequences. I had won a war, but I sensed another was approaching. But the fight was not yet over. I returned to my father's old house on a cold September morning. The entrance still had the same creak, as if the wood recognized my footsteps. Each room seemed smaller than I remembered, perhaps because now I didn't look at them with fear, but with belonging. I opened windows, touched the walls, sat in the armchair where he used to read in silence. For the first time, that house embraced me back. Each room had scars, but also memories. The days that followed were of reconstruction, not just of the house, but of everything it symbolized. I decided to create a foundation in my father's name, aimed at supporting women who, like me, were silenced within their own families. Hope and faith became my partners in this project. Kyle, now graduated, offered to be the legal advisor for the initiative. There was something profoundly healing in using my pain to heal other people. I would transform pain into hope. Of all the accomplishments, the greatest was recognizing myself as a whole person. It wasn't the money, nor the assets, nor the judicial victory that defined me. It was the fact of having faced everything without losing who I was. The will was merely a symbol. The true inheritance was in every decision I made to pick myself up. For the first time, I looked in the mirror and saw a complete woman. I could say I conquered my family, but the truth is I conquered the silence, the absences, the doubts, and that no one can ever take from me. As I left the house that afternoon, I locked the door with the certainty that a new cycle was beginning, not out of revenge but by choice. I was no longer the excluded one, I was the heir to myself. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced something similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.